Well, first, the military always likes to know who's in charge. They want one person to be in charge. You know, the military hierarchy is like that. I kind of like a command and control system. You give orders, the orders are carried out, especially in an emergency. It's not the way it works, and it's never going to work that way. And we can say all we want it to. You're not going to tell Catholic Relief Services what to do. They're board of directors of the Catholic bishops who report to the Pope. You think the United Nations is going to give the Pope orders as to what Catholic doctrine is and how they're going to operate? I work for World Vision, which is now $2.7 billion. It has 40,000 employees. Its base and roots are in the evangelical church. You're not going to tell them what to do. And frankly, the UN's not going to tell the US government what to do. If the UN gave orders to Southcom to do something, they would be cooperative, but they can't give orders. So this is a collaborative system. It requires a high level of coordination. And the more chaos there is, the more difficult it is to do that. There is too much autonomy for everyone, in my view, but it's very hard to alter this. The system is very complicated. We're trying to simplify it by focusing on certain things that are really important. And the last point I would make is that this whole system is affected by politics. And some people say, well, it's terrible to have politics. Politics exists in all institutions, including the international system. Our idea, our principle is to try to minimize the politics, local or international or national politics from the northern countries in relief response, because if your job is to save people's lives, it should be focused on that and not on other things. But it's impossible to say that we're going to keep politics out of this or foreign policy out of this in a place like Afghanistan, which is a war zone. American troops are affected by the aid program. I mean, my son is a second lieutenant, and I understand that this affects the security of our troops and affects the foreign policy of the US and other donors, and it affects the survivability of the Afghan government. Anyway, these are some of the issues that just to put on the table.
You almost perfectly teed it up for General Keane. You, at a moment's notice, had to deploy on a massive scale into this earthquake zone, and you personally happened to be in Port-au-Prince when the earthquake occurred, which tells me that you have some interesting stories to share with us. But tell us a little bit about what that was like and how you dealt with some of the things that Mr. Nasios was talking about in terms of a command structure that's diffuse instead of unitary as the military expects. General Keane.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to thank Georgetown for inviting all of us here, particularly myself. I think the issue of coordination and collaboration is a very important one. And I would like to say, having been visiting Haiti on a 2-day trip that turned into nearly a 100-day trip, it provided me a little bit of insight of what was occurring at that point in time, and able to transmit, although by using a phone card because we couldn't get out on our Blackberries, to U.S. Southern Command and indeed the Pentagon, what we were seeing on the ground. And it became readily evident, literally within minutes, that the devastation of the earthquake, even before it was on the airways, was going to inflict thousands of casualties and great destruction. I happened to be with Ambassador Merton at his residence when the earthquake struck. We were waiting for a reception. We had just spent the afternoon walking through Cité Soleil, where 3 short years earlier I had been in Cité Soleil with helmet and body armor on, and many troops from the United Nations around us as we went through Cité Soleil looking at it. But on this day, we were literally walking through, talking to community leaders about hope, about progress that had been made, and about the tremendous work that had been done by USAID and the United Nations in Cité Soleil to confront the gang problems, but more importantly, to institute social programs that were providing hope there. So as we were talking before the earthquake occurred, there was an air of optimism in terms of potentially where Haiti could go in the coming years. And I would say, because the questions are often asked about the government and about what happened within the first 12 to 24 hours, Ambassador Merton and I, of course, both of us trying to account for people and determine exactly what was happening. By 11 o'clock that night, we had 3 ministers sent by President Preval to Ambassador Merton to transmit his desires for the U.S. government's assistance, and his request to me from the military side was, can you open the port or the airfield, and can you tell me whether the port is usable? And my answer was yes to both of those, and we will do it as soon as we can, because it was obviously that the airport particularly was the lifeline for relief aid and any assistance that was going to be needed. So the following morning, the first thing I did was to get in the car and make my way to the airport. A trip that normally takes 30 minutes took us 3.5 hours because of the devastation in the street, the casualties, and just the destruction that was there. I went by the UN military headquarters first, met the chief of staff who had just walked out of the building and it just collapsed behind him minutes later, and learned of their faith and where they were at. In fact, he directed me down to the airport where the United Nations logistics base was located, where the acting commander, the deputy commander, Major General Toro, a Chilean general, was in charge, because Major General Floriano Peixoto, the Brazilian, was in Miami at the time. We got him, able to get him back within a day or so, but I walked into the conference room and looked around and knew that my world had changed, because as I looked at the UN gathering, I saw 1 general officer and I saw about 30 civilians. Having never really worked real close with the UN before, I knew that this was going to be an interesting undertaking. So we shared, because in fact they were doing a VTC with New York at the time, and I just told him what I saw coming to that morning. I said, you know, people are dying in the streets this very minute. There are thousands, as you well know. I've also been asked why wasn't there such a large scale of rioting and violence in the streets of Haiti following the earthquake. And my answer to that is because the UN was there, because the UN troops were actually out. Now, they weren't securing banks, but they were out looking for their own. They were out providing security as best they could. At the time, the police were in very small numbers at that point because they themselves had been affected. I went back 2 days later to talk to the police commander of the station at Cité Soleil, because I had talked to him that afternoon, and I asked him his personal story. His 2 children and wife had been killed, his mother-in-law had been killed, all in the earthquake, but yet he was still at his post with 5 policemen, and within days they were able to get others there. So they were attempting to do everything they could, and I credit the UN and the military and all the civilian agencies there, because they had taken tremendous casualties, we all know.